scarcity in water, lack of water in communities is a slow growing event that at some point it's going to hit the top, and we'll say, why didn't we think about fixing this 25 years ago? So in our human nature, we react very quickly to things that we could see, destruction, floods, all those type of things, but we don't see the lack of forests, we don't see the rivers dropping, we don't see basins losing their groundwater, and we don't really receive that as humans as a problem. We always think someone else could fix that. So we need to kind of come up with a strategy and thought along those lines. And then finally, our last point was, who pays for it? Okay? We talked a lot about that, and that includes some of these strategies and mechanisms, but for example, if you're an oil-rich country, you could buy your water. And those oil-rich countries will buy that water until that resource disappears. And what it will do is artificially create a sense of security in that community, and that community will grow based on how much water that they have. But when that resource disappears, their storage and everything disappears as well. So we need to take a look at that. And also we're seeing other countries struggle along the lines that I mentioned earlier about wanting to have safe drinking water, safe produce, and figuring out how to treat more of their impaired waters as they go forth, and then balancing the energy demand or resource needs together.
Thank you very much indeed, Jay. In just a second, I'm going to turn to the audience, and if you have burning questions, then this will be your chance to ask them. But first, I want to sort of raise a general issue, and I wonder who's going to want to take this. We've spoken a lot, in fact, about smart technologies. In some respects, it seems to me that the problem that we may have, or one of the problems that we may have, is that we may have smart technologies, but quite often we have dumb users, and we have dumb consumers. We're quite good at inventing new things. We're not really very good, or very good even at understanding transformative change in societies. And I think that's illustrated very well, in fact, by what Jay was just saying about crisis versus chronic risks. We respond quite well as human beings to crises in our societies. We respond incredibly badly to chronic risks, despite the fact that, of course, in the long term, they may be far more damaging. So I wondered if there were any of you on the panel who had thoughts that you'd like to add to that, or ideas you'd like to throw out.
Yeah, I think I don't think we have dumb users, because look at how fast we take up iPads, iPhones, Android, and God knows what. I think it's a bit the syndrome of the frog boiling slowly. We don't have a sense of crisis of the environment degradation because it does go very slowly up to a point where you have a crisis. So the question is always, how do you create the so-called burning platform? I mean, that has been business jargon. You know, when you wanted to get things done, you created the burning platform. So you created a virtual environment where you actually had to do something. And I sense that particularly in meetings like this, where leaders talk to leaders, people who have created their own burning platform, we always get into this wall in sort of how we get mass movement, how do we get momentum and scale. And we can take the politicians out of the equation. Quite often we are, business should do this, business should do that. I think it is something we need to link up with stimulation and intervention that creates a new way of playing. I think we have the technical solutions there. Actually, they're not completely competitive from an economic standpoint, because the market, as we have been reminded yesterday by the TEEB project, the market is full of externalities. And at some point of time, despite of all the leadership, you cannot lean enough out of the window and become uncompetitive by adopting some new technologies. So you have to create something.
I know that Jay and Katerina and Rod also want to come in on this. I might ask first to Katerina, but as it happens, I know that she trained as a psychologist, so she may have particular insights here.
That was exactly That was exactly the way I wanted to approach it, with a very short answer. I think on the one hand it's very difficult, but at the same time easy to change behavior of human beings. You either have to make their old behavior pattern very painful, and then they'll change, or you have the new behavior to make the new behavior pattern very joyful. So I think these are the two ways, and I think making things painful are, for example, applying taxes, costs to it, or make it very inconvenient. And a joyful way we've just heard with the iPhones, that apparently everyone loves to play with these things. So I think if we keep those two things in mind, we can change human behavior and have the smart user rather than the dumb user.
And just to carry on a little bit, I think the foundation of that change has to be accountability, and to really figure out what, as business leaders, what is our true water footprint. That means how much water does it take for each of the components of our product in order for us to be competitive in the market. And then how do we go back and minimize that footprint to be the smallest we can to still be competitive in the market area. And I think that we lack a lot of that because we look at water just as what flows out of the tap. We don't look at how much water was used to dye that material, how much water was used to create that piece of plastic, how much water was used to ship that from point A to point B. So I think if you start as business leaders to look at the awareness of how much actual water you actually do use, then you start to see ways to save that. And once you start to do that, you start to see the public responding as well. So you need to set the pattern and move forward and have awareness of what the issue really is.
I want to turn quickly to Rod, and if there are people who want to come in on this or other points, then please raise your hand so I can identify you while Rod is talking.
Yeah, I think you have to take these really complex issues and present them in a way that can appeal and get emotion from the public. So, for example, last year we ran a very successful campaign on tigers, and we're able to have really simple, emotional messages about the fact that there's very few tigers left on the planet. And behind that were all the issues of water and forest and everything else, but the tiger is something that the public can relate to. And similarly, as NGOs and companies, you know, we put producers through enormous hoops to produce certified palm oil or certified forests. We have a kind of obligation then to convince the public that they can feel good buying those certified products and explain why they should feel good buying them, rather than just leaving the producers having to do all the hard work and not having a market as a result of that.
Thank you very much. Are there people in the audience who want to come in on any of this? Please raise your hand if you... No? We obviously have a very shy audience. But Alex wants to come in.
Yeah, I am thinking about water, climate. I mean, last 12 or 18 months, we've actually had a whole series of acute natural disasters, many of them climate-related, in all sorts of different parts of the world: Mexico, Middle East, Australia, Southeast Asia, and now tornadoes in the USA, which is controversial, but kind of in my view, kind of probably climate-related or a sort of stark warning. So in a sense, we don't have to worry about, I don't think, about this sort of issue about not responding to chronic signals, because there are actually a lot of acute signals now. I think what we have to worry about is whether humans actually are good at responding to acute signals. And I very much wonder what will be the response in the USA to this latest round of tornadoes. And what I fear is that there's a sort of human nature that causes some slightly perverse backlash against acute signals as well as a blindness to chronic signals, and that the climate skepticism that's been growing in the USA will actually accelerate as a result of tornadoes in a sort of war against climate mentality as a result of the suffering that's been happening. And I don't know enough about how the public has responded in Australia to the droughts and then floods, but it seems to be that there is a backlash against the carbon tax in Australia that it doesn't compute to me that people who just a few months ago were suffering from extreme economic hardship as a result of climate problems should now be protesting against a carbon tax, unless there's something quite weird going on that is a challenge that I would like to throw back to psychologists to tell us what's going on and how we get over this sort of perverse reaction to short-term pain as well as kind of invisibility of long-term trends.